Good evening, and welcome to Season 9 of Shhh Productions Vintage Radio Hour, sponsored by our friends at Dutch Creek Winery. Our COVID-inspired project now encompasses almost 160 fantastic performers from 21 states, Canada, and the UK, and seeks to transport our audiences back to the golden days of radio. Our gifted storytellers bring you a collection of 3 shows filled with adventure, romance, suspense, and maybe a little mystery. Our selections tonight include classic literary and cinematic tales lovingly adapted for your listening pleasure. So without any further ado, we ask that you sit back, relax, and
My name is Jane Eyre. I have no father or mother, brothers or sisters. As a child, I lived with my aunt Mrs. Reed at Gateshead Hall. I do not remember that she ever spoke one kind word to me. When I was 10 years old, she sent me off to school.
So, Mrs. Reed, this is the little girl respecting whom you applied to me. Her size is small. What's your name, little girl?
Jane Eyre.
Ho-ho! Say, Jane Eyre, Mr. Brocklehurst, little girl.
Jane Eyre, Mr. Brocklehurst.
Well, Jane Eyre, are you a good child? No sight so sad as that of a naughty child, especially a naughty little girl. Do you know where the wicked go after death?
They go to hell.
Well, and what must you do to avoid going to hell?
I must keep in good health and not die.
And how can you keep in good health? Children younger than you die daily. Tell me, Jane Eyre, do you read the Bible?
Sometimes.
With pleasure?
No, sir.
No! Oh, how shocking. I have a little boy, younger than you, who knows 6 psalms by heart, and when you ask him which he'd rather have, a gingerbread nut to eat or a verse of a psalm to learn, he always says, "Oh, a verse of a psalm! Angels sing psalms," says he. "I wish to be a little angel here below." He then gets 2 gingerbread nuts in return for his infant piety.
Psalms are not interesting.
That proves you have a wicked heart and must pray God to change it, and to give you a new and clean one, and to take away your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And we'll try our best to help God, will we not, Mrs. Reed, and make you a useful and humble girl.
I left Gateshead Hall on a dark, cold morning for Lowood. As the coach started, I put out my head and looked back at the house and up at the window behind which my aunt was still sleeping. "I'm glad you're sending me away, Mrs. Reed, for I hate to live here with you, and if anyone asks me how I liked you and how you treated me, I will always say you treated me with miserable cruelty, and that the very sight of you makes me sick." I spent 8 years at Lowood. It was not so much a school as an institution for the children of the poor, supported by charitable bequests. Soon after I was 18, I placed an advertisement in the Yorkshire Herald, applying for the position of governess. The following week a reply came from a Mrs. Fairfax of Thornfield Hall, near Millcote in Yorkshire.
If J.E., who advertised last Thursday, is qualified to teach the usual branches of a good English education, together with French, drawing, and music, and if she is in a position to give satisfactory references of character and competency, a situation can be offered her where there is but one pupil, a little girl, 9 years of age.
3 days later, I left Lowood School. I arose and dressed myself with care. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I regretted that I was not handsomer. I felt it a misfortune to be so little, pale, and with features so irregular. I brushed my hair very smooth, put on my black frock, adjusted my clean white tucker. Then I set out for my new situation. On the evening of the next day, I was at Thornfield Hall. I was ushered into a small room. At a table by a cheerful fire sat the neatest imaginable little old lady, occupied in knitting.
How do you do, my dear? I'm afraid you've had a tedious ride.
Are you Mrs. Fairfax?
Ah, you are right. Now sit down here before this fire here. You must be tired to death.
Oh, no, indeed, ma'am. Shall I have the pleasure of seeing Miss Fairfax tonight?
What did you say, my dear? I'm a little deaf.
Shall I have the pleasure of seeing Miss Fairfax tonight?
Oh, you mean your pupil, Adele. Oh, she is not my daughter.
Indeed.
No, I have no family.
And you have this great house all alone?
Oh, bless you, my dear child. This house is not mine. It belongs to Mr. Rochester.
And who is he?
The owner of Thornfield Hall. Did you not know he was called Rochester? He owns the house and much of the land about. I'm merely the housekeeper. Your pupil is his ward. He wrote to me to find a governess for her.
He's not here himself?
Oh, almost never. Much of the time he is abroad.
It seems strange for a gentleman to own this great house, yet never stop here and enjoy it.
You will find, Miss Eyre, that Mr. Rochester is, in many ways, a strange gentleman.
I slept smooth and soundly that night in my new home. Once I woke and heard a clock strike. I heard another sound. Perhaps I was still half asleep and dreaming. It seemed to me that somewhere in the house I heard a low, mirthless laugh. When I woke, the sun was shining, and then for many weeks nothing happened to break that smooth course of our lives at Thornfield Hall. One day in January I put on my coat and went out for a walk. As I started back, the afternoon was already dimming. On the hilltop above me sat the rising moon, pale as a cloud. I walked fast to get home. A sheet of ice covered the bridge, where a little brook had overflowed after a rapid thaw. Suddenly in the distance I heard the sound of horses' hoofs. A horseman came over the hill, down towards the little bridge.
Easy, easy there! Oh, the devil!
Are you injured, sir?
Stand on one side, feather away. Down, pilot, easy there. Ah, my leg!
If you are hurt and want help, sir, I can fetch a carriage from Thornfield Hall.
Thank you, I shall do. I've no broken bones, only a sprain. Go along, child, leave me alone.
I wouldn't think of leaving you, sir, at so late an hour, till I see you are fit to mount your horse again.
I should think you ought to be home yourself, if you have a home in the neighbourhood. Where do you come from?
From just below. I'm not at all afraid of being out late when it's moonlight.
Oh, you live just below. You mean in the house with the battlements?
Yes, sir.
Whose house is it?
Mr. Rochester's?
Or do you know Mr. Rochester?
No, I've never seen him.
He's not resident, then?
No,
Can you tell me where he is?
I cannot. I'm told he's at Thornfield very rarely.
Well, you're not a servant at the Hall, of course. You're
I am the governess to Mr. Rochester's ward.
the governess. Deuce take it, if I hadn't forgotten the governess. Well, I can't send you to fetch her, but you may be able to help me yourself, if you'll be so kind.
Yes, sir.
You've not an umbrella that I can use as a stick?
No.
Excuse me. Necessity compels me to make you useful. Here, come close. Let me lean on your shoulder. Now, hold the bridle. Here we are. Thank you. Now just hand me my whip, which lies there under the hedge.
Here, sir.
Thank you.
As I walked back to Thornfield, I kept seeing his tall figure enveloped in a riding cloak, fur-collared and steel-clasped, remembering his stern face, his angry, thwarted eyes. It was late when I got back to the hall. Mrs. Fairfax, what dog is that?
He came with the master.
With who?
With the master, Mr. Rochester. He's just arrived. He's in the dining room, and John has gone for a surgeon. Master's had an accident. His horse fell coming down Hay Lane. He sent for you, Jane, and was surprised when I told him that you were out.
Did he say anything about...
He said that you were to go to him the minute that you came in. You'd better hurry.
Come in.
I knew him at once, with his broad, dark eyes, his square forehead and grim mouth. When he looked up, I could see no trace of recognition in his eyes.
Well, Miss Eyre, I have questioned your pupil, my little ward, found you've taken great pains with her. She's not bright, she has no talents, yet in a short time she's made much improvement. Sit down, Miss Eyre, come to the fire. Adele, go amuse yourself with the dog. You've been resident in my house 3 months, Miss Eyre.
Yes, sir.
You come from...
From Lowood School, sir.
A charitable concern. How long were you there?
8 years.
8 years? No wonder you have the look of another world, Miss Eyre. I marvelled where you'd got that sort of a face. I had half a mind just now in Hay Lane to demand whether you'd bewitched my horse. Who are your parents?
I have none.
Never had, I suppose. Do you remember them?
No, Mr. Rochester.
Who recommended you to come here to Thornfield?
I advertised, and Mrs. Fairfax answered my advertisement.
Oh, yes. Mrs. Fairfax speaks quite well of you. Praise will not bias me. You began by throwing down my horse.
Sir?
I have you to thank for the sprain. Well, what age were you, Miss Eyre, when you went to Lowood?
About 10.
Stayed there 8 years? You're now about 18. Arithmetic is useful. Tell me, what did you learn at Lowood? Can you play?
A little.
Of course, the established answer. Sit down at the piano, Miss Eyre. I mean, if you please, excuse my tone of command. I cannot alter my customary habits for a new inmate. Sit down at the piano and play a tune.
Very well, sir.
Enough, Miss Eyre. That's enough. That you play a little, I see, like any other English schoolgirl, perhaps better than some, but not well. Are you happy when you play?
I am absorbed, sir.
So absorbed, Miss Eyre, that you have let Adele sit up past her bedtime. Good night. Good night to all of you now.
For several days I did not see Mr. Rochester. Then one evening he sent for me to come down.
Come in, Miss Eyre. Be seated. Don't draw that chair further off, Miss Eyre. Sit down exactly where I placed it, if you please. Otherwise I cannot see you without disturbing my position in this comfortable chair, which I have no mind to do. You examine me, Miss Eyre. Do you think me handsome?
No, sir.
No. Upon my word, there's something singular about you. You're very quaint, quiet, grave, and simple. You sit there with your eyes generally bent on the carpet, except when they are directed piercingly to my face, as just now, for instance. When one asks you a question, you rap out a rejoinder, which is, if not blunt, at least brusque. What do you mean by it?
Sir, I speak too plain. I beg your pardon. I ought to have replied that tastes differ, that beauty is of little consequence, or something of that sort.
You should have replied, no such thing. Beauty of little consequence indeed. Go on. What faults do you find with me, pray? I suppose I have all my limbs and all my features like any other man?
I am sorry, Mr. Rochester. Forgive me, it was only a blunder.
Just so, and you shall be answerable for it. Now, Miss Eyre, criticize me. Does my forehead not please you? Does it look as if I am a fool?
Far from it, sir.
Young lady, even I have a kind of rude tenderness of heart. Or don't you believe that? You're not pretty any more than I'm handsome, yet a puzzled air becomes you, so puzzle on. You puzzled me the first evening I invited you down here. I've almost forgotten you since. Other ideas have driven you from my head. But tonight I have resolved to be at ease. It would please me now to learn more of you. Therefore, speak. Speak.
What about, sir?
Whatever you like. I leave the choice of subject entirely to you. You're dumb, Miss Eyre, or stubborn. Yes, stubborn and a little annoyed. And it's my fault, Miss Eyre. I put my request in an absurd and almost insulting form. Miss Eyre, I beg your pardon. Where are you going, Miss Eyre?
To put Adele to bed. It's past her bedtime.
Confess it! You're afraid of me!
I am bewildered. I have no wish to talk nonsense.
If you did it, you would do it in such a grave, quiet manner. I should mistake it for sense. Do you never laugh, Miss Eyre? Don't trouble to answer.
It's past 9, sir. Good night.
Good night. Good night, Miss Eyre.
I had no rest that night. I could not sleep for thinking of Mr. Rochester, his strange manner of speaking, the sad look that was in his eyes, his moodiness with others, his kindness to me. He'd been at Thornfield 6 days now. Mrs. Fairfax said that he never stayed there for more than a fortnight. In a few days he'd be gone again. I lay there, listening. Then it seemed my door was touched, as if fingernails were groping their way along the panels of the dark gallery outside. Who's there? Who is it? Quickly, I got out of bed. I hurried on my frock and shawl. With trembling hands, I opened the door. The air was filled with smoke. There was a strong smell of burning. Mr. Rochester's door was ajar, and the smoke rushed from his room. I went in. The curtains were on fire. Wake! Wake, Mr. Rochester, wake! He lay stupefied in his sleep. I rushed to the basin and pitcher.
What is it? Is there a flood?
No, sir, but there's been a fire.
In the name of all the elves in Christendom, is that Jane Eyre? What have you done with me, witch, sorceress, in the smoke? Who was in the room besides you? Have you plotted to drown me?
I will fetch a candle, sir.
Wait till I get my dry garments. Here they are. Here's my dressing gown. Now run for a candle.
Shall I call Mrs. Fairfax?
Mrs. Fairfax? No, not at all. Just be still, be still. Look at me, Jane. Jane, did you hear an odd laugh tonight? Have you heard that laugh before, or something like it?
Yes, sir. I thought perhaps one of the servants.
Just so. One of the servants. Yes, that's it. You've guessed it, Jane. I'm glad you're the only person acquainted with the precise details of tonight's accident. Jane, say nothing about it. Return to your own room. I shall do very well on the sofa in the library for the rest of the night. In 2 hours the servants will be up.
Good night.
Are you quitting me already? And in that way?
But you had said I might go, sir.
Not in that brief, dry fashion. Why, you've saved my life. At least shake hands. Jane, you've saved my life. I knew you'd do me some good in some way, sometime.
I'm glad. I'm glad I happen to be more awake, sir.
But you will go.
I'm cold.
Cold? Yes, and standing in a pool of water. Well, go then, Jane. Go.
This evening's broadcast of Shhh Productions Vintage Radio Hour is brought to you by Dutch Creek Winery. Located in the beautiful countryside of Athens, Ohio, a quick drive from uptown Athens and the rest of the Hocking Hills area. Visit their tasting room to enjoy their unique and amazing small batch wines, ciders, and meads, as well as local craft beers and other treats. Spend an afternoon or evening relaxing in their tasting room in an enclosed patio overlooking the scenery, or in the dog-friendly picnic grove. No reservations required. Enjoy your wine selection expertly paired with a house-made pizza or charcuterie board. And don't forget, Sunday mornings at Dutch Creek Winery makes for waffle boards and cedar mimosas. Visit them at 12157 State Route 690, just 8 miles outside of Athens, Ohio, or on the web at dutchcreekwinery.com, Facebook, or Instagram. For more information on seasonal events and current offerings, remember to ask for their wines at your favorite local retailer. And they also ship. And now, back to the program.
I did not see Mr. Rochester again for several weeks. He had left Thornfield Hall, and when he did finally come home, it was with a large company of very elegant guests. For days the house was filled with their maids and valets. There was one lady in particular to whom my master, Mr. Rochester, seemed especially attentive.
The Honourable Blanche Ingram, Lord Ingram's sister, she is. She's held the most beautiful girl in the county.
She is beautiful, and this beautiful and accomplished young lady is not yet married.
It appears not. The fact is, she has no very large fortune.
Oh, but Miss Fairfax, is there not some wealthy nobleman or rich man has taken fancy to her? Mr. Rochester, for instance. He is rich, is he not?
Oh, yes, but you see, there is a considerable difference in age. Mr. Rochester is past 40. Miss Ingram's barely 20.
But what of that? More unequal marriages are made every day.
True, yet I scarcely fancy Mr. Rochester would entertain an idea of that sort. Mr. Rochester is very talented and lively in society. The ladies are very fond of him, but I don't think he has any intention of marrying anybody. But what's the matter with you, child? Well, you've scarcely tasted anything since you began tea. What is it, Jane?
I soon had a chance to observe Miss Ingram myself. That evening, word came that Mr. Rochester wished to introduce my pupil Adele to the ladies in the drawing-room after dinner. As they came in from the dining-room, their dresses gleamed in the light. I rose and curtsied to them. One or two bent their heads in return, the others only stared at me. As soon as I could, I left quietly through the side door. In the passage, I noticed that the ribbon of my shoe was loose. I stopped to tie it.
How do you do?
Oh, I'm very well, sir.
Jane, why did you not come over and speak to me in the drawing-room?
I did not wish to disturb you.
What have you been doing during my absence?
Nothing particular. Teaching Adele, as usual.
And getting a good deal paler. Return to the drawing-room, Miss Eyre. You're deserting too early.
I am tired, sir.
And a little depressed. Well, tonight I excuse you, but understand that as long as my visitors stay, I expect you to appear in the drawing-room every evening. It is my wish. Don't neglect it. Now, who in the devil is that at this time of the night?
Shall I go see, sir?
Yes, Jane, I must return to my guests. I fear Miss Ingram will have marked my absence. Well, whoever it is, say I'll not see him.
Yes, sir. Mr. Rochester, Mr. Rochester!
Yes, Jane, what is it? You seem excited.
It's a man to see you, sir. He wouldn't be put off. He said he'd wait for you. He went into the drawing room.
The devil he did! Have you got his name?
His name is Mason, sir, and he comes from the West Indies, from Jamaica, I think.
Mason, West Indies. Is that what he said?
Do you feel ill, sir?
Jane. Jane.
Oh, lean on me, sir.
Jane, you offered me your shoulder once before. Let me have it now.
Yes, sir, yes. And my arm.
Jane, if all the people in that drawing room came in a body and spat at me, what would you do, Jane?
I'd turn them out of the room, sir, if I could.
But if I were to go into them and they left me one by one, what then? What would you go with them?
I rather think not, sir. I should have more pleasure in staying with you.
To comfort me?
Yes, sir, to comfort you, as well as I could.
Go in the drawing room, Jane. Step quietly up to Mason and whisper in his ear that Mr. Rochester wishes to see him. Bring him here and then leave me. Good night.
Much later that night, I awakened suddenly.
Help! 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 Will no one come? Rochester! Rochester!
Jane! Jane, get up! I need you! Jane, have you a sponge in your room?
Yes, sir.
Have you any salts?
Yes.
Fetch both. Jane, you won't turn sick at the sight of blood.
I don't think I shall. I've never been tried yet.
Let me see. Give me your hand. Warm and steady. You'll do.
I followed Mr. Rochester to the floor above. We entered a large room, and beyond that there was an open door. There was a light shining there, and from inside came a low sound, almost like a dog growling. In a chair in the centre of the room was the form of a man, huddled and still. Mr. Rochester held the candle over it. I saw that it was the stranger, Mason, the man that had called earlier that evening. His sleeve and his shirt on the one side were soaked with blood.
She's done for me.
Nonsense, Mason.
She's done for me.
You've lost a little blood, that's all.
Sorry, I...
Jane, hold the candle. Hold this basin.
She went at me with her teeth.
Mason, shut up!
She bit me like a dog when you took the knife from her.
I said be on your guard.
Oh, it was. I didn't expect it. She was so quiet at first.
I warned you, Mason.
I thought I could have done her some good.
You thought. It makes me impatient to hear you. Now get up. You must be out of this house before morning.
Rochester, she sucked the blood. She said she drained my heart.
Come, be silent. Don't mind her gibberish. Don't repeat it.
I wish I could forget it.
You will, Mason, when you're out of the country. Now come on, I'll help you downstairs. There's a carriage waiting.
Oh, thank God.
When you get back to Spanish Town, you'll think of her as dead and buried, if you think of her at all.
Rochester, let her be taken care of. Let her be treated as tenderly as may be.
I do my best, Mason, and have done my best, and will do it, never fear. Yet, would to God there was an end to all of this.
A splendid midsummer shone over England. It was as if a band of Italian days had come from the south, like a flock of glorious passenger birds, and alighted to the rest of them on the cliffs of Albion. The last of the visitors had long since gone away. A great calm descended on Thornfield Hall, and Mr. Rochester stayed on. Among the servants the talk continued about his coming marriage to Miss Ingram, yet I saw no preparations going on for such an event. I used to look at my master's face to see if it was sad or fierce. I could not forget that dreadful night, that strange secret terror that seemed to hang over him. But I had never seen his face so clear, or of clouds, or ill feeling as it was in those weeks. Never had he called me more frequently to his presence, never had he been kinder to me, and alas, never have I loved him so well. It was Midsummer Eve. I went down into the orchard, enticed there by the light of the rising moon. I heard a nightingale singing in the woods far away. The trees were laden with ripening fruit.
Jane! Good evening, Jane. Thornfield's a pleasant place in the summer, is it not?
Yes, sir.
You must have become, to some degree, attached to the house,
Oh, I am attached to it indeed.
and would be sorry to part with it.
Yes.
Pity. It's always the way of events in this life. No sooner have you got settled in a pleasant resting place than a voice calls to you to rise and move on, for the hour of repose is expired.
Must I move on, sir? Must I leave Thornfield?
I believe you must, Jane. I am sorry, Jane, but I believe indeed you must.
Well, sir, I shall be ready when the order to march comes.
It's come now. I must give it tonight.
You're going to be married, sir?
Exactly. Precisely. With your usual acuteness, you've hit the nail straight on the head.
Soon, sir?
Very soon. That means you and your pupil... Look at me, Jane. You're not turning your head to look after more nightingales, are you? Adele must go to school, and you, Miss Eyre, will get a new station.
Yes, sir. I will advertise immediately.
I've already, through my future mother-in-law, heard of a place that I think will suit. A place in Connaught, Ireland.
It is a long way off, sir.
From what, Jane?
Oh, from England, and from Thornfield, and
Well,
from you, sir.
it is. To be sure it is. We've been good friends, Jane, have we not? Oh, come, we'll sit here in peace tonight, though we should never more sit here together. Sometimes, when you're near to me, as now, it's as if I had a string somewhere under my left rib, inextricably knotted to a similar string situated on the corresponding corner of your little frame. And if that boisterous channel comes broad between us, I'm afraid that cord of communion will be snapped, and then I've a nervous notion I should take to bleeding inwardly. As for you, you'd forget me.
Oh, that I never should, sir. You know, I wish I'd never been born. I wish I'd never come to Thornfield.
Because you're sorry to leave it.
Because I have known you, Mr. Rochester. And it strikes me with terror and anguish I must absolutely be torn from you forever. It's like looking at the necessity of death.
Where do you see the necessity?
Where? You, sir, have placed it before me.
In what shape?
In the shape of your bride, Miss Ingram.
My bride? What bride? I have no bride.
But you will have.
Yes, I will. I will, yes.
Then I must go. You have said it yourself.
No, you must stay, I swear it, and the oath shall be kept.
But I tell you I must go. Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you? Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, that I am soulless and heartless? I have as much soul as you and full as much heart.
Jane, be still. I offer you my hand, my heart, and a share of all my possessions.
Don't mock me.
I ask you to pass through life at my side, to be my wife. It's you only I intend to marry. Come, Jane. Come here.
Your bride stands between us.
My bride is here. What love would I have for Miss Ingram? None, and that you know. I would not, I could not marry her, you strange, you almost unearthly thing. I love you as my own flesh.
Do you truly love me? Do you sincerely wish me to be your wife?
I do. I swear it.
Then, sir, I'll marry you.
Come to me, Jane. Make my happiness, I will make yours. God pardon me, and men meddle not with me. I have her, and I'll hold her. Jane, Jane.
I require and charge you both, you, Edward Rochester, and you, Jane Eyre, that if either of you know of any impediment why you should not lawfully be joined together in matrimony, do you now confess it? Edward Rochester, wilt thou have this woman for thy wedded wife?
This marriage cannot go on.
Proceed with the service.
An insuperable impediment to this marriage exists, and I can prove it.
What can he mean?
What is the nature of the impediment? What is the nature of the impediment?
The existence of a previous marriage. Mr. Rochester has a wedded wife now living.
Can you prove that, sir?
Of course. I have an affidavit. I affirm and can prove that Edward Rochester of Thornfield Hall in the county of Yorkshire was married on the 20th of October, 1821.
That does not prove that my wife is still living.
She is living. She's now living at Thornfield Hall. I saw her there last April.
Who are you, sir?
I am her brother.
There's brother.
Gentlemen, gentlemen, what this man says here is true. I have been married, and the woman to whom I was married is alive. All of you say you never heard of a Mrs. Rochester in the house up yonder, but I dare say you've often heard gossip about the mysterious lunatic kept under watch. I now inform you that she is my wife, Bertha Mason, whom I married 15 years ago in Spanish Town, Jamaica. Bertha Mason is insane. You may see for yourself, if you wish, what sort of being I was cheated into marrying, and judge whether or not I had right to break the compact and seek happiness with this girl I love. Well, I failed. Take the coach back to Thornfield. It will not be wanted today. Away with your congratulations and your sympathy. Who wants them? They're 15 years too late.
Next morning at dawn, I made my possessions into a parcel, tied on my bonnet, pinned my shawl, took my slippers, which I've not put on yet, and stole from my room. For the last time I passed Mr. Rochester's door and stared silently down the dark stairs.
Jane, you're going, Jane.
I am going, sir.
You're leaving me.
Yes.
You will not stay, Jane. You will not be my comforter, my rescuer, my deep love, my tragic grief. They're nothing to you.
I must go.
Oh, Jane, this is wicked. It be not. Jane, it won't be wicked to love me.
It would to obey you.
Then you will not yield. Jane, you will not stay.
No. God bless you, my dear master. God keep you from harm and wrong. Reward you well for your past kindness to me. Farewell.
No, Jane, my hope, my love, my life.
Sadly, I made my way downstairs. I sat across the field. My shoes were wet with dew. I thought of him now in his room, watching the sun rising, hoping I should come back and say I'd stay with him. I went on through the fields, stumbling blindly, not knowing where I was going. A year and a half went by. I took a position that was open in a school in the Midlands, as far as I could from Thornfield. But I thought of Mr. Rochester everywhere. In the end, I wrote to Mrs. Fairfax and begged for news. 3 months wore away. Day after day, the post arrived and brought nothing for me. Then one day I could stand it no longer. I packed my things and I took the stagecoach for the north. 36 hours later, I was at Millcote.
Long way today, ma'am. You see, we don't get many travellers here these days. Lose your way or something?
I thought perhaps you could tell me, is Mr. Rochester living at Thornfield Hall now?
Why, say, ma'am, you must be a proper stranger in these parts. Don't you know? Thornfield Hall's quite a ruin. Not a stone standing. It was burnt down just about harvest time. Fire broke out in the dead of night, and before the engines arrived from Millcote, the building was one mass of flame.
The dead of night. Was it known how it started?
Well, they guessed, ma'am, they guessed. Indeed, I'd say it was ascertained without a doubt. You see, there was this woman, would you believe it? A lunatic, kept in the house. And this woman turned out to be Mr. Rochester's wife. It all came to life in a strange way. Yes, it did. There was a young lady, came to live at the Hall, a governess.
But the fire, was Mr. Rochester at home when the fire broke out?
Oh, yes, indeed he was. He went up to the attic. All was burning above and below, and got the servants out of their beds and helped them down himself. And then he went back to get his mad wife out of her cell. We called to him. She was on the roof, and we heard him call her name. We saw him approach her, and then, Mom, she yelled and gave a great spring, and the next minute she lay smashed on the pavement.
Dead?
Yes, Mom. Dead as the stones on which her brain and blood were scattered.
Oh. But is he alive?
What? Oh, yes, Mom. Yes, Mr. Rochester's alive, but many think he had better be dead.
Why? Where is he? Is he in England?
Aye, he is in England. He can't go out of England. Yes, I fancy he's a fixture now. He's stone blind. Yes, he's stone blind, Mr. Rochester.
I found him in a small manor house nearby, with two of the old servants from Thornfield looking after him. The parlour looked gloomy, a neglected handful of fire burnt low in the grate, and leaning over it with his head supported against the high old-fashioned mantelpiece stood Mr. Rochester.
Is that you, Mrs. Fairfax? Down, Pilot, down. What's the matter? It is you, Mrs. Fairfax, is it not?
Mrs. Fairfax is in the kitchen.
Who is this? Answer me. Speak again.
Will you have a little tea?
Who is it? Who speaks?
Your dog knows me, and John and Mrs. Fairfax know I am here. I came only this evening.
Great God, what delusion has come over me? What sweet madness has seized me? Where are you? Are you only a voice? I can't see, but I must feel, or my heart will stop and my brain burst. Her very fingers, her small, slight fingers. There must be more of her. Is this Jane? It is her shape. This is her size.
And this her voice. She's all here, her heart too. God bless you, sir. I'm glad to be so near you again.
Jane. Jane Eyre.
I have now been married 10 years. I know what it is to live entirely for and with what I love best on earth. Edward Rochester continued blind the first 2 years of our marriage. Then one morning, as I was writing a letter to him for his dictation, he came and bent over me.
Jane? Jane, have you a glittering ornament around your neck?
Yes.
And, Jane, are you wearing a pale blue dress?
Yes! Later, when our firstborn was put into his arms, he could see that boy had inherited his own eyes, as they once were, laughing, brilliant, and black.
Thank you to our outstanding performers, our sponsor, Dutch Creek Winery, and to you, our audience, for joining us for our 9th season. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we invite you to hop on over to our next classic tale, The Birds, which will begin soon on our YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for our next season of shows. And until then, have a wonderful summer, take care of each other, and shh.